Was just another quiet afternoon on the highway. Nothing out of the ordinary. Just the usual hum of engines and the occasional breeze rustling through the trees lining the road. But for one man, this day would take a sharp, unexpected turn that no one could have seen coming. Judge Elijah Brooks, a respected African-American judge known for his calm demeanor and fair rulings, was on his way home after a long day in court. Dressed in a crisp suit and tie, he looked every bit the professional he was. But as he cruised down the road, a sudden flash of red and blue lights in his rearview mirror changed everything. The officer who pulled him over was young, visibly tense, and seemed to be looking for trouble. Without much explanation, he approached the judge's car with a hard face and a firm hand resting on his belt. His tone was cold, demanding license and registration before Elijah could even finish saying hello. The judge, calm as ever, complied politely, but something about the way the officer was behaving wasn't right. It felt off. The questions were invasive, the suspicion too strong, and the reason for the stop wasn't clear at all. It was the kind of interaction that black drivers have feared and faced too often. As the situation escalated, Elijah tried to explain who he was, hoping his identity would de-escalate things. But instead of recognition or respect, it seemed to make the officer even more agitated. There was something brewing under the surface, something personal, something ugly. The tension between them was rising fast, and other drivers started to slow down and glance over, sensing something serious unfolding. But before the situation could hit its peak, something unexpected happened, something that would flip the story on its head and leave everyone stunned. At the same time, across town in a crowded city bus, another quiet act was unfolding, one that would also end up changing more than just the lives of those involved. 17-year-old Marcus Green was on his way home from school, headphones in, backpack slung over one shoulder. The bus was packed, every seat filled, people standing shoulder to shoulder. As the bus came to a stop, a pregnant woman stepped in, looking exhausted, trying to hold herself steady as the bus lurched forward again. Without hesitation, Marcus stood up and offered his seat. The woman smiled gratefully and sat down, clearly relieved. A few people noticed, nodded in approval, and then went back to their phones. It was a simple gesture, kind, thoughtful, respectful. Marcus didn't think much of it. He just plugged his headphones back in and leaned against a rail, watching the city pass by outside the window. But what he didn't realize was that the woman he gave his seat to had been having the hardest week of her life, and the kindness of a young stranger had struck something deep inside her. She watched him for a few moments, then quietly reached into her bag, scribbled something on a folded piece of paper, and waited for just the right moment. As the bus pulled up to Marcus's stop, he moved toward the door, ready to hop off. But before he could leave, the woman called out to him, holding the note in her hand. He turned, surprised, and took it. She smiled again, this time with a look that held something more, something like gratitude, or maybe even destiny. He unfolded the paper as he stepped onto the sidewalk, and what he read on that note would change everything. 2 very different lives, 2 very different moments, but both unfolding in ways no one could have predicted. One, act driven by power and prejudice, the other by kindness and compassion, and both stories, though seemingly unconnected, were about to collide in a way that would leave everyone watching speechless. What happened next? Well, let's just say, nobody saw it coming. Judge Elijah Brooks wasn't new to difficult situations. After over 2 decades on the bench, he had seen the worst of humanity. The toughest courtroom battles and the most heartbreaking stories play out right in front of him. But what was happening on the side of that highway didn't feel like any courtroom drama. It felt personal. The officer, whose name tag read D. Wheeler, was breathing hard like he was building up to something. His voice was sharp, almost accusing, and his hand kept brushing against his holster, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed. "License and registration," Officer Wheeler repeated, his eyes narrowing. "I already gave you that, officer," Elijah replied calmly, keeping his hands on the steering wheel. "Can I ask why I've been pulled over?" Wheeler didn't answer at first. He just stared as if studying Elijah's face. "You fit the description," he finally muttered. Elijah had heard that phrase before. Too many times. It was vague, often used when there wasn't a real reason for a stop, but instead of reacting with anger, Elijah stayed cool. That was how he'd always handled things, with patience and logic. Still inside, a quiet unease was creeping in. The officer's behavior didn't feel like a routine check anymore. There was something else at play, and Elijah could tell. This wasn't going to be a quick interaction. Meanwhile, across the city, Marcus Green walked slowly down the street with the note still in his hand. He hadn't opened it yet. Part of him was curious, but another part was confused. Why would a stranger give him a note for giving up a seat? It wasn't a big deal. He'd been raised right. His mom always told him, "Be the kind of man who doesn't need to be asked to do the right thing." And that's just how he lived. Quiet, respectful, trying to stay out of trouble in a world that often seemed too quick to judge. He finally stopped at a corner, stepped under a streetlight, and unfolded the note. "Thank you. You reminded me that good people still exist. Want to help you. Please don't throw this away. Emily J." He blinked at the message. It was handwritten in neat, careful letters. At the bottom, there was a phone number. Marcus frowned, then looked around as if someone might be watching. Him. What did she mean by help? He folded the note again and stuffed it in his pocket, unsure what to make of it. Maybe she was just being nice. Or maybe this was the beginning of something bigger than he could imagine. Back on the highway, things had escalated. Judge Brooks had been asked to step out of the vehicle. Still calm, but now more alert, he complied. "Officer," he said, standing. Tall. "I'm not resisting, but I'd like to make a phone call." "You don't need to call anyone," Wheeler said, glancing toward his cruiser. "You're not under arrest. Yet." That word, yet, hung heavy in the air. Elijah glanced at the other cars passing by. A few slowed down, but no one stopped. He could feel the eyes of the drivers looking, then turning away. No one wanted to get involved. He took a deep breath. He wasn't afraid exactly, but he was aware that things like this could go sideways fast. It didn't matter that he wore a black robe in court. Out here on the side of the road, he was just a black man in a nice car to someone looking through the wrong lens. "Officer, I think there's a misunderstanding here," Elijah said. "If you run my ID, you'll see I'm a state judge. I'd like this interaction to remain respectful." But Wheeler's jaw was clenched. "Don't tell me how to do my job," he snapped. "You think your title means you're above the law?" "No," Elijah said simply. "I think it means I know how the law works." That moment, those few words, seemed to trigger something in Wheeler. He stepped closer, now inches from Elijah's face, his voice lower, but even more intense. "I know you're kind," he said under his breath. "Always thinking you're better." Elijah held his ground, not responding. He'd been insulted before, but this felt like something darker, something rooted in more than just personal bias. And then, for a brief second, Wheeler's hand moved toward his radio, and Elijah braced himself. Was he calling for backup? Making something up? It was hard to tell. Back in the neighborhood where Marcus lived, things weren't exactly peaceful. Either. He walked up the steps to his apartment, still thinking about the note. His mom, Tanya, opened the door before he could knock. "You're late," she said, half smiling, half worried. "Bus was packed," he replied, slipping off his shoes. She noticed his distracted look. "Everything okay?" He hesitated, then pulled out the note. "A lady on the bus gave me this." She read it, eyebrows raised. "You think it's legit?" "I don't know. Seemed like a good person." "Could be," Tanya said softly. "But be careful, not everyone who seems good is safe." Marcus nodded, thinking again about the woman's eyes. She didn't seem fake or shady. She looked tired, real, like someone carrying a lot on her shoulders. He went to his room and stared at the note again. The number was just sitting there, daring him to do something. He picked up his phone, hovered over the keypad, then set it down again. Not yet. Something told him this wasn't a decision to make lightly. While Marcus sat with uncertainty, Judge Brooks stood in growing danger. Wheeler had returned to his cruiser, but not to check records. He was on his radio, speaking quickly, too quickly. Elijah couldn't hear it all, but he caught a few words. Non-compliant, possible threat, requesting assistance. A chill ran through him. This wasn't a traffic stop anymore. It was turning into something else, something that didn't make sense. He hadn't raised his voice, he hadn't refused any request, and yet somehow he was being painted as dangerous. Elijah looked at his phone, still in the car. Could he get to it in time? Should he even try? And just as he was debating, headlights appeared behind the officer's cruiser, another squad car pulling up fast. Inside, Marcus sat on the edge of his bed, staring at his phone again. And across the city, Judge Elijah Brooks watched as a second officer stepped out of the car, hands already tensed, scanning the scene like he was walking into a war. None of them knew it yet. But what was about to happen next would connect them in a way they never saw coming, and it would leave everyone asking the same question. How can one moment, one decision change everything? The answer was just around the corner. The second officer walked up fast, his hand resting on his belt, scanning the scene with sharp eyes. Elijah could feel the air shift. Something about this cop was different. Older, maybe, more experienced, but no less alert. Officer Wheeler stepped over and spoke to him in a low tone. Elijah couldn't hear all the words, but he caught a few. Again, refused to comply, acting suspicious and possible aggression. That was a lie. And now there were two of them. Elijah took a small step forward, careful not to seem sudden. Officers, he said, his voice firm but respectful. I've done nothing wrong. I'm a sitting judge. I'm asking that this stop be handled appropriately. The second officer's eyes flicked toward him, reading him. Name, he asked. Elijah Brooks, 11th District Court. I can provide proof. The officer nodded slowly, clearly processing. But Wheeler was pacing now, agitated. He's trying to intimidate us with his title, he said sharply. You don't know what I saw. He was reaching under his seat. Another lie. Elijah hadn't even moved inside the car once he stopped. But it was clear now. Wheeler was building something, a story, a reason, maybe for backup, maybe worse. And if the other officer believed him, things could spiral fast. Elijah kept his hands visible, his heart beating harder now. His training, his education, his years of service, none of it mattered in this moment. He knew what it meant to be black in America. He knew how quickly things could be twisted. While Elijah stood on that cold stretch of highway trying to hold on to control, Marcus was sitting in his room, still staring at that folded note. He didn't know why, but something about it wouldn't let him rest. He finally picked up his phone and dialed the number. It rang twice before someone answered. Hello? It was her voice. Emily. Hi, Marcus said, suddenly unsure of what to say. This is the kid from the bus. You gave me that note? Oh, yes, Marcus, right? I'm glad you called. There was a pause. Her voice was calm but carried something under the surface. Sadness, nervousness. He couldn't quite place it. I didn't mean to freak you out, she said quickly. I was having a rough day. And what you did reminded me that people still care. It meant a lot. No worries, Marcus replied, still cautious. I wasn't expecting a note, that's all. She was quiet again, then said, I work for a non-profit. We help inner-city youth with scholarships and mentoring. You reminded me of someone I once knew. I think we might be able to help you. If you're interested. Marcus's eyebrows lifted. Help how? There's a program, she continued. It's small, but we cover tuition, offer job training, even internships. But it's more than that. We support young leaders, people who want to do something with their lives. I think you've got that spark. He didn't know what to say. Nobody had ever said something like that to him. Usually the best he got was, keep your head down, or try not to get in trouble. But here was a complete stranger offering, Something real. "I'll think about it," he said quietly. "Good," she replied. "No pressure, just don't let this world convince you that you're invisible. You're not." Back on the roadside, Elijah watched as the second officer finally stepped away from Wheeler and walked toward him. "Judge Brooks," he said, more respectful now. "I'm going to need to confirm everything, but if what you're saying is true, we'll get this sorted." "I appreciate that," Elijah said. Wheeler wasn't done, though. "You're just going to take his word?" he asked the other cop. This judge," the older officer corrected. "Let's stay professional." Wheeler bit his tongue, but his eyes were still burning. Elijah knew that look. He'd seen it from the bench when some officers testified. There was a kind of bitterness that couldn't be reasoned with. And something about Elijah, his position, his calmness, maybe even his refusal to get angry, seemed to enrage Wheeler even more. As the officers stepped away to speak again, Elijah glanced toward his car. His phone was still on the seat. He debated whether he could reach it without escalating things. If anything went wrong, it would be his word against theirs. Unless he had proof. He looked toward the road. Still no cameras, no witnesses. Or so, he thought. What he didn't know was that a car had passed just a few minutes earlier. A young woman named Zoe, a freelance videographer, had been driving home from a shoot when she spotted the scene. Something about the body language caught her eye. 2 white cops, 1 black man in a suit standing by his car. It looked tense. She'd pulled over about half a mile up and doubled back quietly on foot with her small camera. She crouched low, behind a barrier, zooming in, recording the whole thing from a distance. She didn't know who the man was, but her gut told her it was important. And Zoe had learned to trust her instincts. They had helped her catch moments of injustice before, moments that needed to be seen. Across town, Emily sat in her tiny office looking at Marcus's number on her phone. She hadn't told him everything yet. How could she? The truth was, she used to work in corporate law. She had money, influence, a network. But her life had taken a sharp turn after she'd gotten sick, then pregnant. Her world crumbled when her fiancé left, and she realized then how invisible some people become when life hits hard. That's why she started her nonprofit. That's why Marcus's gesture on the bus shook her. In a moment when no one was watching, he'd chosen kindness. No spotlight, no reward. That meant something. She wasn't done helping him. She just didn't know yet how big of a role he would play in what was coming. Because while she sat in her office and Zoe filmed in silence, Elijah Brooks was still standing on the shoulder of the road, facing something bigger than a traffic. "Stop." Wheeler was pacing again. His radio crackled. A 3rd unit had been dispatched. "Back up." Elijah's stomach dropped. This wasn't ending soon. And in that moment he knew. This wasn't just about him anymore. Something was building. A conflict that went beyond the highway, beyond the badge, beyond one wrong stop. It was about power, about race, about what happens when truth and lies collide. And just before the 3rd car arrived, Wheeler walked back toward him slowly. A strange look in his eyes. Not anger now, something else. Something that sent a chill through Elijah. This story, it wasn't even close to over.